After the death of Princess Viserys and the fallout with Queen Alysanne, Jaehaerys Targaryen began his royal progress to the west and flew to Castle Rock, as well as many other great seats of the west alone in 88 AC. This time he even called upon Fair Isle, as the despised Lord Franklin Farman was safely in his grave. The king was gone far longer than he had originally intended. He had roadworks to inspect, and found himself making unplanned stops at smaller towns and castles, which delighted many of the petty lords and landed knights. Prince Aemon joined him at certain castles, Prince Balon at others, but neither could persuade the king to return home to the Red Keep. When at last he had exhausted the hospitality of the Westermen, he did not return to King's Landing, but moved on directly to the Reach, flying Vermithor from Crackle to Old Oak to begin a second progress, even as the first was ending. By that time, the Queen's absence had been noted, and the King would often find himself seated next to some maid or handsome widow at a feast, but he took no notice of any of them. At Bandalon, when Lord Blackbar's youngest daughter was so bold as to seat herself on his lap and attempt to feed him a grape, Jaehaerys brushed her hand aside and said, "Forgive me, but I have a queen, and no taste for paramours." The maesters referred to this estrangement between the king and queen as the Great Rift. For the entirety of 89 AC, the king remained on the move. At Highgarden, he was joined for a time by his granddaughter, Princess Rhaenys, who flew to his side on Meleys. Together they visited the Shield Islands, where the king had never been before. Jaehaerys made a point of landing on all 4 islands. It was during this trip that Rhaenys told him of her plans to marry and receive the king's blessing. His journey finally ended in Oldtown, where he visited his daughter, Septa Maegella. He was blessed by the High Septon and feasted by the Conclave, and enjoyed a tourney staged in his honour by Lord Hightower. It was Septa Maegella who bridged the great rift between Jaehaerys and Alysanne. "This is foolish, father," she said to him. "Rhaenys is to be married next year, and it should be a great occasion. She'll want all of us there, including both you and mother. The Archmaesters call you the Conciliator. It is time that you conciliated your own affairs." A fortnight later, King Jaehaerys returned to King's Landing, and Queen Alysanne returned from her own exile on Dragonstone. What words passed between them is not known, but they were once again as close as they had ever been. In the 90th year after Aegon's conquest, the king and queen shared one of their last good times together as they celebrated the wedding of their eldest grandchild, Princess Rhaenys, to Corlys Velaryon of Driftmark, the Lord of the Tides. At 37, the Sea Snake was already hailed as the greatest seafarer Westeros had ever known. But with his 9 great voyages behind him, he had come home to marry and make a family. Rhaenys, at 16, was a fearless young beauty, and more than a match. A dragon rider since 13, she insisted upon arriving to the wedding on Meleys, the magnificent scarlet she-dragon that had once borne her aunt Alyssa. That was a good day, Queen Alysanne would say with a sad smile through the years that remained to her. She was 54 that year, but sad to say, she did not have many good days left. During the years 91 to 92 AC, became known as the Myrish Bloodbath. In the free city of Myr, 2 rival factions vied for supremacy. There were assassinations, riots, poisonings, and sea battles before one side emerged supreme. The losing faction, driven from the city, tried to establish themselves first upon the Stepstones, only to be hounded from there as well, when the Archon of Tyrosh made common cause with a league of pirate kings. In their desperation, the Myrishmen next turned to the island of Tarth, where their landing took the Evenstar by surprise. In a short time, they had taken the entire eastern side of the island. Neither the king nor his council felt it would require much to drive them back. Prince Aemon would lead the assault, while the Sea Snake would first need to bring the Velaryon fleet south to protect Lord Borman Baratheon as he made his crossing to Tarth with his Stormlanders. Their combined strength would be more than enough to suffice to retake all of Tarth from the Myrish, and if they proved to be in unexpected difficulties, Prince Aemon would of course have Caraxes. Lord Corlys and his fleet set sail from Driftmark on the 9th day of the 3rd moon of 92 AC. Prince Aemon followed a few hours later after bidding farewell to Lady Jocelyn and their daughter Rhaenys. The princess had just learned she was expecting a child, else she would have accompanied her father on Meleys. "Into battle," the prince said. "As if I would ever have permitted that. You have your own battle to fight. Lord Corlys will want a son, I'm sure, and I would like a grandson." Those were the last words he would ever speak to his daughter. Caraxes swiftly outdistanced the Sea Snake and his fleet, dropping down out of the sky on Tarth. Lord Cambron, the Evenstar of Tarth, had fallen back into the spine of mountains that ran down the centre of the island, and established a camp in a hidden valley from which he could look down upon the Myrish and their movements below. Prince Aemon met him there, and the two made plans together, whilst Caraxes devoured half a dozen goats. But the Evenstar's camp was not as hidden as he had hoped, and the smoke from the dragon fire drew the eyes of a pair of Myrish scouts who were creeping through the heights unawares. One of them recognized the Evenstar as he strolled through the camp at dusk, talking with Prince Aemon. The men of Myr are indifferent sailors and feeble soldiers. Their weapons of choice are dirks, daggers, and crossbows, preferably poisoned. One of the Myrish scouts wound his crossbow, hiding behind the rocks. Rising, he took aim at the Evenstar, 100 yards below, and loosed his bolt. Dusk and distance made his aim less than certain, and the bolt missed Lord Cameron, but struck Prince Aemon, standing at his side. The iron bolt punctured through the prince's throat and out the back of his neck. The Prince of Dragonstone fell to his knees, grasping the crossbow bolt, as if to pull it from his throat, but his strength was gone. Aemon Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonstone, died struggling to speak, drowned on his own blood. He was 37 years old. Words can't tell of the grief that swept the Seven Kingdoms, of the pain felt by King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, of Lady Jocelyn Baratheon's empty bed and bitter tears, and the way Princess Rhaenys wept to know her father would never hold her child. But one thing that can be spoken for is Prince Balon's wrath, and how he came down upon Tarth on Vhagar, howling for vengeance for his brother and best friend. The Myrish ships burned, as Prince Moria Martell's ships had burned 9 years earlier, and when the Evenstar and Lord Bourmont descended upon them from the mountains, they had nowhere left to flee. They were cut down by the thousands, and left to rot along the beaches, so even waves that washed ashore for days were tinged with pink. Balon the Brave played his part in the slaughter, with Dark Sister in hand. When he returned to King's Landing with his brother's corpse, the small folk lined the streets, screaming his name and hailing him as a hero, but it is said that when he saw his mother again, he fell into her arms and wept. "I slew 1,000 of them," he said, "but it would not bring him back." The Queen stroked his hair and comforted her son. Seasons came and went in the years that followed. There were hot days and warm days, and days where the salt wind blew, bracing off the sea. There were fields of flowers in the spring, and bountiful harvests, golden autumn afternoons, and all across the realm the rose crept onwards, and new bridges spanned old streams. King took no pleasure in any of it, so far as men could tell. "It is always winter now," he said to Septon Bath one night, when he had drunk too much. Since Aemon's death, he'd always drunk a cup or 3 of honeyed wine at night to help him sleep. In 93 AC, Prince Balon's 16-year-old son, Viserys, entered the dragon pit, claimed Balerion the Blackdread. The old dragon had stopped growing at last, but he had become sluggish and heavy and hard to rouse, and he struggled when Viserys urged him up into the air. The young prince flew thrice around the city before landing again. He had intended to fly to Dragonstone, he told his father afterwards, but he did not think the Blackdread had the strength for it. Less than a year later, Balerion was gone, the last living creature in all the world who saw Valyria in its glory, wrote Septon Bath in his notes. Bath himself died 4 years later, in 98 AC. Grand Maester Elsa preceded him by half a year. Lord Redwine had died in 89 AC. His son Robert soon thereafter. New men took their places, but Jaehaerys was truly the old king by now, and sometimes he would walk into the council chambers and think, who are these men? Do I know them? The king grieved for Prince Aemon until the end of his days, but the old king never dreamed that Aemon's death in 92 AC would be like the hell horns of Valyrian legend, bringing death and destruction down on all those who heard the sound. Little did anyone know at the time, but one Myrish crossbow bolt sparked the Dance of Dragons.